Good morning. Well, we were dealing yesterday with the idea of design and a designer. And therefore, the most natural question we have to ask ourselves now is, who is this designer? We give him the name God, but who is this designer? And we must deal with this because it's a very important question. But as we look at it, we realize it's a question which is almost unanswerable. Let me explain to you. Out on the lawn, there are two dogs, my dogs, and they're very philosophical dogs. And they get together in the sun and they lie around and they talk to each other. And in their philosophical discussions, they discuss very important questions. And one of the most important questions they discuss with one another is this: where does food come from? Where does food come from? You can see why it's an important question, because it's essential for their lives. Now the black one, well, he's not very sort of intelligent. And he's quite just a puppy, just about a year old. And he is quite convinced that food comes from the cupboard in the kitchen, because that's where we all go and fetch it every time we feed him. Food comes from the cupboard in the kitchen. The older one, the brown one, well, he's not so certain. He thinks there's more to it than the cupboard in the kitchen, and he is quite convinced, although he hasn't been able to convince the black one about this. He is quite convinced that in fact food comes from a place called Aldi, because he's been in the car when I've been there and fetched it. So he's quite convinced that it comes from a place called Aldi. Now me, because I have a little bit more intelligence than the dogs, I've got a feeling that Aldi get it from a place called Warehouse. And Warehouse, well, they get it from a person called Farmer. And Farmer, well, we have to go on further and further. Do you see what I'm trying to say? Sometimes things are almost beyond our understanding. But what we can do is that we can begin to look back into the past. Remember I was saying to you about us having senses, physical senses for our bodies, mental senses for our minds, so we can almost see and hear and think about things and consider great truths about the universe and about where we come from. But I also said to you that there is a third part to our personality, a spiritual part, a part by which we can understand God, we can come to know him, and we can hear him. Now, what I'm going to do to you now is say quite simply, if you want to really know who God is and what he's like, then we have to go to people who have experienced God and find out what it is that they say about him. Now, these people have set down their thoughts and their ideas over many thousands of years. They've set them down so that we can read them and try to understand them. Because if we're going to really go forward and allow our own spiritual life to begin to develop, what we have to do is go back to people who have experienced it before. And as we begin to read and as we begin to think about it, suddenly what we'll find is that our own spiritual life will almost begin to wake up. So just as we can see and hear physically, and just as we can see and hear mentally, so we will begin to see and hear spiritually as well. Of course, we are lucky because we have these stories given to us by these people who are spiritually mature, and then incorporated for us in the Bible. A combined book containing many, many different books and many people's experience of who God is and what he's like. And as we go back to that book and begin to read it, we can see that these experiences spread over such a long time are quite consistent. Now, once again, I was talking some time ago, and I said that in the last generation, and in last century rather, in our century, we've had the whole theory of evolution almost trying to accept and untruth something which is not right. Now, we've been told quite simply that the whole of life is an accident. It's just come into being. It has evolved from one stage to another. And people have accepted it. People have accepted it as an explanation. But when we go back to these people who have experienced God, they will tell you something different. They will tell you that no, it's not an accident. That God has both created us, designed us, and created us for a purpose. And as we go back, we'll begin to understand more about what that purpose is about and what it consists of. So now we've just gone a few days on. Now we've been continuing this. God does exist. And we're going to begin to see what these spiritual people have said about him. Amen.